Thanks, Dan. Morning. So if we haven't met yet, I'm Steve, American accent Steve, or as opposed to all the other Steves that it feels like there are around here. Like Dan was saying, we've been spending the last few months here in Oxfordshire, though we'll be heading back to North Cyprus, which is where we're normally based as a family. We're actually going back in a couple of weeks, so it's really great to get to be here in kind of our final days with you. I'm excited to get to share with you from James chapter 4 today, but first, I was wondering if anyone knows what this is. Coffee grinder. There we go. So it's a really simple mechanism. You just put some coffee beans in the top, put this little crank on, and then you just turn it, grind it, and after a while, you start getting ground coffee in the bottom. Now, my kids see me doing this most days, and naturally, they're kids. They want to join in. They want to help. And so a few weeks ago, my 3-year-old daughter, who's a twin, she insisted she wanted to help, and she actually wanted to do it all by herself, as kids do. I knew it wasn't actually possible for her to do it all by herself. It's a bit sticky. So I kind of cheated and put my thumb on it, so she starts turning it, and my thumb does most of the work, and she gets to turn it. And she was managing so much that she even wanted to take it away and do it by herself, at which point she couldn't anymore. But then she realized something. You just go the other way. Oh, that's easy. And she was like, I can do this by myself. Like, no, so I was trying to tell her, no, like it doesn't work that way. You have to do it the other direction. She turned to me and she said, but Poppy, that way's hard. I'm sure you can see the problem. While turning the other direction is easier, it doesn't grind any coffee. That lack of tension, that lack of any resistance, of any pushback is much more comfortable. It's much easier, but it doesn't actually produce anything of value. It doesn't give you that glorious nectar that you can drink and makes you a little bit jittery. They didn't have decaf this morning, so woo. I think the same thing is true if you're wanting to build muscle, if you're wanting to develop any sort of physical fitness, isn't it? If you're not straining against something, if there's no resistance, you're probably not improving. You're probably not getting better, not getting any stronger. I could decide I'm going to be a runner like Dan. I'm going to run 10 seconds a day, but every day. I could do that for a year, and I'm not going to be a runner. I'm not going to be any more fit. I'm not really going to be any better at running after running 10 seconds a day. I could decide to kind of lift weights. I'm going to be stronger. I'm going to develop my muscles by lifting some weights. There's a slide about weightlifting. I could do a lot of reps, and my biceps are not going to get bigger like I want them to. And a lack of tension, a lack of resistance is much more comfortable. It's much easier, but it doesn't produce anything of value. I think that same principle is something we can apply to our spiritual formation, to our character, to our faith. If we're always comfortable, if we never experience tension or resistance, it's unlikely that we're going to grow. Luckily for us, the book of James is full of things that produce tension. So let's look at chapter 4, verses 13 to 17. James says, "Now listen, you who say, 'Today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money.' Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, 'If it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that.' As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them." Now, I don't know about you, but reading this produces some tension in me. For one, I was assigned this passage 4 months ago. So back in March, I said, in 4 months, I will go to OCC, get up on stage, preach a sermon on James 4, 13 to 17, and blow everyone's minds. Maybe not the last part, but, is this kind of planning ahead a problem? My knee-jerk reaction is to say, no, of course not. Planning's great. We need planning. How do we ever get anything done without planning? We can't just live day to day, led by the Spirit. Well, can we? That also sounds like a thing you would say. And that's actually a recurring theme for me when reading some of these challenging parts of Scripture, I find myself saying, okay, but that's not what that really means, right? Like, that seems too radical. And the temptation is just to kind of brush it aside, say, well, that's a bit weird. Maybe that's some poetic exaggeration, and then I'll just carry on with my life as normal. But this morning, I really want to encourage us to actually kind of wrestle with the implications of this passage. Is there something in the way we live that needs to change in line with what James is saying here? Verse 5 says, instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. How many of us actually talk like this? Oh yeah, tomorrow, if the Lord wills it, I'm going to go to work. And then on my lunch break, if the Lord wills it, I'm going to go look for something that's kind of discounted at the service station. Maybe some discounted sushi if the Lord wills it. The Lord does not will it, by the way. I can just tell you that much already. Does anyone actually talk this way? I do actually know a couple billion people that do. I've got a slide up for that. How many of you are familiar with the term inshallah? Yeah, inshallah. It's originally an Arabic term, though it's made its way into many other languages. And you'll mostly hear it from a couple billion Muslims, though Arabic-speaking Christians will also use it. Some Greek speakers will use it in Cyprus. Inshallah just means if Allah wills it, if God wills it. So similar to James, the Quran actually commands Muslims to say inshallah, to say if God wills it, if the Lord wills it, whenever they speak about future plans. There's kind of a parallel there to what James seems to be talking about. And so if you visit Turkey or Egypt or Indonesia, you will hear this phrase, inshallah, constantly. Oh, Steve, are you going to the party tomorrow? Oh, inshallah, I'm really looking forward to it. What are your plans for next week? Oh, inshallah, I'll be going on holiday to the seaside, And I think inshallah kind of encapsulates, it does a good job of conveying a lot of the flexibility and the spontaneity of a lot of these more Eastern cultures. It doesn't take 2 months to find a day to have a meal with your friends, because no one's really made any plans beyond the next week. Yeah, amen. You'll get invited to tea by someone you just met in a shop. You went to buy some milk, next thing you know, you're invited to tea. But you're not stressed about fitting it in or being late or going too early, because all they said was, come by sometime tomorrow afternoon, maybe. And you're not annoyed, theoretically, when you're a part of this culture. You're not annoyed when your guests are really late, because, well, of course, it was more important that they clean their living room because their mother-in-law might be dropping by unexpectedly. Saying inshallah is just one way that people are recognizing that some events are just outside of our control. So it'd be foolish, it'd be a bit silly to just try and commit too strongly to any one thing, to be too rigid, to be too locked into that. But as anyone who's spent much time in this part of the world will know, inshallah is also a phrase that's especially beloved by tradespeople, by tradesmen. So when I asked the carpenter when he'd finish working on the project I gave him to do for me, he responded, I'll finish in 2 days, inshallah. Spoiler, it was not 2 days. And when I asked the optician when my new glasses would be ready, he said, inshallah, in 2 weeks. And his inshallah there, the little kind of footnote, little asterisk, allowed those 2 weeks to kind of stretch into 2 years. And counting, I still haven't gotten them, but inshallah, they'll be ready next week. And when a child asks his parents if he can have a new PlayStation for his birthday, he hears the response dreaded by Muslim children all across the world, inshallah. In fact, one of the most common uses of inshallah is in an ironic way, where it basically means, yeah, that's not going to happen. This usage is so widespread that a few years ago, an American presidential candidate used it in a debate. He was debating his opponent, and he said, oh, you're going to release your tax returns. When? Inshallah? You see, in Islam, there is a kind of fatalism, a kind of determinism at points, because God is so all-powerful, so all-knowing, and so all in control that everything is already fated. Everything is already determined. And so God's will overrides all other wills to the points that humans don't actually have very much agency, very much responsibility. It's why you'll rarely see Egyptian taxi drivers wearing seatbelts. And you ask them, why aren't you wearing a seatbelt? If God says it's my time to die, there's not much I can do about that, is there? It's fate. It's fated. It's determined. And so that the inshallah phrase, but more than that, kind of the inshallah mindset, can become a way of deflecting responsibility onto God. It's not that I forgot to do my job. It's that God ordained the circumstances of my life in such a way that the job got forgotten. And one of the biggest challenges in places I've been to in the Middle East and Central Asia is a lack of long-term planning, a lack of long-term investing. So Cyprus, where we live, is sunny between 300 and 340 days of the year. Dan gets really excited about this. Has more potential for solar power than any country in the European Union. And yet, in the north of Cyprus, solar power is almost non-existent. Electricity bills are cripplingly expensive, as much as rent sometimes. Now, I'm not saying that all of the problems in the Middle East and the world would go away if people just stopped saying inshallah. Obviously, there's dozens of other complex factors that contribute to the problems that people are facing, but it does seem to me that this kind of fatalistic mindset, this avoidance of long-term careful planning, might be one factor that contributes to some of these issues. And yet, isn't that exactly what James is telling us to be like, is telling us to do? Not to make big, ambitious plans for this year we'll do this, much less 10 years down the line. Or on the flip side, can we kind of just do whatever we want and plan whatever we want as long as we tack on a Lord willing at the end of it? Lord willing, I'll do this in 10 years. As in my experience so far, the UK is very much not an inshallah culture. I may be wrong, but so far, it's different. People have 5-year plans. People have 10-year plans. If you look for a 10-year, I just kind of Googled 10-year plan. Immediately this popped up, why you need a 10-year plan. Oh, okay. You don't find those websites in Turkish for some reason. A 10-year plan, Google tries to autocorrect it. You mean a 1-year plan? Like, did you misspell that? People have 5-year plans, 10-year plans, long-term investments. Sermon series are planned months in advance. You have meetings about it, even if the preacher sometimes submits his slides about 10 minutes before the service starts. The norm is that there's a lot of planning, you know? And people generally give you a lot of warning before they just show up at your house. They generally wait to be invited to show up at your house. Bus schedules are published months in advance. You know what days the bus maybe isn't going to be running, in theory, inshallah. There's good in this. There's a good in this sort of planning. It allows a lot of good things to happen. I've really appreciated the depth of this sermon series to get to hear from so many different people who've clearly spent time and effort and energy thoughtfully planning out what they're going to say and not just kind of showing up and being like, the Lord's going to lead today. And yet, this emphasis on planning, on long-term, on all the details, can become quite rigid and confining, can't it? Everyone is busy and overworked. We've been here for several months, and there's still friends we haven't managed to see because we just haven't been able to find a time in the diary that's not already filled with something else. You have to book a place in nursery when you find out you're pregnant, because otherwise you're not going to get a slot. It takes months to go through the process of buying a house or renting a flat, and if something goes wrong at any one of those many stages, you have to start from the beginning. In contrast, when we moved to North Cyprus several years ago, I flew ahead of time, and in 3 days, I bought a car, found a flat, signed a contract, changed the locks, moved in luggage. And that was like, by Cyprus standards, I guess that was pretty okay. You kind of took your time a little bit, but we spend tons of resources in the West, in the UK, preparing for unlikely situations a lot of the time. Anyone who's involved in safeguarding or running the building, I imagine all the people running the building, all the sorts of codes and regulations and safety things you have to jump through is a big headache at points. We often say no to easy solutions because we have to finish the process we started. Or we play Monopoly for 16 hours over 4 days because we have to finish the game even though no one's enjoying it since about hour 2. We spend millions commissioning studies to tell us things that are obvious to everyone. The city of New York was just in the news for this because after they spent a couple of $1 million almost on a study that concluded, you know what, there's a slide for this, it's probably better to put rubbish in wheelie bins instead of on the street in bags. It cost them $1.6 million to find that out. I could have probably done that study for about $500,000, but That's just me. The quote above there, by the way, is about rats, saying they're getting more and more bold. They no longer run from you. They just hang out and just do what they want. And we want to make sure we can change that in a real way. Wheelie bins. Planning mindset. Now, this planning mindset is so ingrained that we can become rigid. So even if we don't have plans, per se, we've probably already made some mental plans about how we want to spend our day. And we're not willing to change those plans when something unexpected comes up. So someone might invite you to dinner for tonight or for tomorrow night, and you might not actually have any other plans. You might not have anything you need to be doing, but you might just instinctively say no. Because even if you don't actually have any other commitments, you might have already kind of made a mental plan of, tonight, I'm going to eat some of these leftovers, I'm going to catch up on that show I've been meaning to watch. And you've made a mental plan, even though it's not in the diary, it's not a fixed thing. You could change it, but you don't really want to. So we have two sides here. On the one hand, you've got a culture that, at its best, is flexible and spontaneous and open to new things and fun. And at its worst, is unreliable, unprepared, unproductive. On the other hand, we have a culture, more common here, and a mindset which at its best can be productive and considerate and builds towards something bigger, towards something better, and at its worst can be rigid and inefficient and just limiting. So I want to imagine holding that tension. So it's like with resistance bands, and if you use them sometimes, you can tie them to two different posts or two different areas and kind of pull them together. This is kind of the closest picture I could find to that. Probably a better one, actually, is the next slide. This most encapsulates the kind of thing I'm picturing. This is Spider-Man holding two halves of a ship together, I think. It's kind of had an accident, stuff's happening. That visual is kind of what I have in mind here, of holding the tension. It's much easier, just like it's easier to turn the grinder the wrong way. It's much easier just to go to one side. Just get rid of that tension, go to one side. Holding the middle ground in lots of life, in politics and thought, and so many areas of life, holding that middle ground is so much more difficult. And yet it's that resistance, it's that tension that produces something in us. I don't think God is inherently more comfortable in either of these sides. I don't think God lives over here and kind of looks askance at all of you over here. And I don't think God is over here judging and punishing these cultures. I think God is in the middle there somewhere, or hopping back and forth, or everywhere. So let's look at the passage again. James says, "Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them." It seems like the key verse here is verse 16. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. When our confidence, when our sense of security, our sense of safety comes not from our faith in God's goodness, not from remembering what he has done for us, not from finding joy in his character, but when that safety, when that security comes from our own contingency plans, our own backup plans, our own savings, I think that's where we start to go wrong. When our sense of well-being is tied to how much money we have in the bank, or to knowing what our housing arrangement's going to be in 6 months, or to knowing what our job situation will be next year. If I can just figure that out, then I can relax. And that's when we start to veer off of that middle path. We've said before in this series that the book of James draws a lot on both the Sermon on the Mount and the book of Proverbs. And I think this section seems like it's clearly inspired by Proverbs 27, verse 1. That says, "Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring." And James makes the same argument in verse 14. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Now, I was going to have a slide and some pictures of mist to explain this metaphor to you, but let's be real, you live in England. You don't need me to explain what mist is to you. That would be a little bit like when my 3-year-old explains to me, Puppy, people don't eat rocks. This was yesterday. Oh, okay. Mist doesn't last very long. Our lives, our plans can seem all-encompassing, all-important. They can obscure everything else. They can seem like they're the dominant feature in the world. But it burns away in a few minutes under the sun. We're not as grand, we're not as important, we're not as wise as we often think we are. I think the point of this passage is not that we have to say kind of a key catchphrase before we make our plans, Lord willing, Lord willing. I know a couple of, in a kind of a Turkish context, Christians from a Muslim background who have just kind of Christianized the Muslim habit of saying inshallah kind of after everything and just change it to Lord willing, Rabbi dilerse. Okay, well, are you coming or not? Well, I'll come, Rabbi dilerse. Okay, he does. Like, he wants you to come to church. Like, just commit to something. I think these verses are trying to show us the proper relationship between God's will and our will. We submit to his will. Verse 12, which is before the passage we looked at today, says that God is the lawgiver and judge. So just as it is not our place to judge other people, it is also not our place to think we can ordain the future. I often find myself, or sometimes find myself, angry or frustrated with God because events didn't turn out the way I'd planned them. And when I say it like that, it sounds silly. But in the moment, I think a lot of us experience that frustration. Why isn't God fitting in with my plans? This was a really good plan. But my plans always need to be submitted to God's will. He's the one who holds our futures in his hands. And yet, he does choose to work with us. He does choose to use us, to partner with us. So we do have a responsibility to be good stewards of what he gives us. I think we see both of these in the Gospels. The man who plans ahead wisely, who builds his house upon the rock, he's commended, he is praised. And yet the man who builds a new barn to store his surplus wealth, to prepare for the future, instead of sharing that with those who needed it, he's struck down dead. And we see how Jesus grieves deeply when people aren't willing to lay aside their plans, even good plans, to come and follow him then and there. Wonder if Jesus had been incarnated in Oxford in 2024 and he came to you saying, come and follow me, would your answer be, sounds great. Let me check my diary and see if there's a way I can fit you in. Verse 17 says, if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. This feels like a bit of a strange jump going through the rest of the passage. What does this have to do with planning or boasting? When I read this verse, it reminded me of a story, and it's a true story, by the way. This actually happened. It's not one of those sermon stories that's just an illustration. This is a real, true story. It actually happened. You can Google it if you don't believe me. There was a group of students at a seminary, and they were in a preaching class. They were learning to do this. Their assignment one week was to prepare a sermon about the parable of the Good Samaritan. So then they met in the classroom after they kind of spent some time preparing this, and they were sent one by one to deliver the sermon in a different building, kind of across the university campus. Some of the students were kind of given a time constraint. They were told they needed to hurry to get there in time to give their sermon because they were late. The other students were told, oh, take your time, you don't need to rush. There's a bit of a backlog to work through, don't worry about it too much. What the seminary students didn't know was that this whole assignment was just a big experiment. They were all the guinea pigs. And on that route between the classroom and the stage where they were meant to give their sermon, there was an actor who disguised himself as someone who needed assistance, someone who was in trouble, kind of on the ground, coughing, clearly in need of help. And as the pastors in training passed him on their way to give a sermon about the Good Samaritan, only 60% of the ones who weren't in a hurry stopped. And of the ones who'd been told they needed to hurry because they were running late, 10% stopped. 10%. It's not that the ones who didn't stop didn't want to help, but they'd spent a long time working on that sermon. They'd put a lot of effort into it. They had made a commitment. They'd planned. people were expecting them. People were waiting on them. And it's easy to judge those that didn't stop, but it's worth seriously asking ourselves whether we would have done it any differently, or whether we do the same thing in our daily lives. How many times do we not stop to help the person on the side of the road, literally or metaphorically, because we have a really important, really good thing we've already committed to do? Now, to be clear, Scripture doesn't call us to be unreliable, flaky, to just change with the wind and call it being Spirit-led. Let your yes be yes, Scripture tells us. I've talked about how in the West and in the UK, there's this culture of planning ahead, filling in the diary really far in advance. And I think that's generally true to what I've experienced. But I think, especially in my generation, there are ways in which that is changing, but not always in a good way. Increasingly, it seems, there's been some studies on this, that people are hesitant to commit to anything too far in advance because they're afraid they're going to miss out on something better. We sometimes talk about FOMO, the fear of missing out. I think especially millennials and Gen Z have this. So if you've ever been in a group chat, you've experienced this probably. You're going to set a date for an outing or a lunch or a movie night or some sort of activity, and people are going to be like, yeah, sounds great, I'll let you know. Pencil me in. Tentative yes. It's not that there's something else on the diary already, but something might come up. Something better might come up. And we don't, good luck getting a head count on who's actually coming to that meal until maybe the day before or 2 days before, or maybe just until they show up. Because people don't want to commit unless, because something else might come around. Something better might come up. Or I might just not feel like it on the day of. And there's that tension again. Flexibility is good, spontaneity is good, adaptability is good, but respect for others and their time is good. Being able to plan something in advance so that it's good, so that it's less stressful, so that it's high quality, that is also good. I think Bex models this very well. I think planning in advance for the worship, working through the songs, practicing, having meetings about it, and yet being able to flex in the moment, to stretch it, to add in a different song, to allow someone else to be a part of that worship. That's the tension. That's difficult. So I want to finish this message with a short exercise for you, for all of us. There should be paper and pen available kind of on the seats around you. If you don't have one, see if a neighbor has one, or you can share around or something. I just want to take a few minutes, probably about 3 minutes. There's 3 questions, 3 kind of things I want you to write. Take a minute for each of them. I want you to plan something. I want you to write down a plan. For some of you, this is like, this is what I do every day. This is my wife. Every day, to-do list on different scraps of paper. On her to-do list is to merge her to-do lists into a single to-do list so that she can then check it off. Like, some people really like the scrap paper and lists, and for some of you, this is like anathema. Either way, there's 3 different things I want you to write down a plan for this week or the next couple of weeks. First is someone to talk to. That could be over tea, that could be over a meal, that could be on a walk. It could be a friend you already have that you just want to spend some more time with. It could be someone you've been meaning to connect with but haven't really taken the time to. It could be someone you've never met, someone at church. Just make a tentative plan. It can be tentative. On Tuesday or at some point this week, I want to have tea with this person. I want to have a meal with this person. I want to call this person and see if they'll go on a walk with me during my lunch break or something. Secondly, some fun activity to do by yourself. Often it's, is there anything more Western than planning in fun? Well, sometimes you need to. I was playing a video game last night with one of my friends in Turkey. We both have very small children. We both have a lot of stuff on our plate. And we know if we don't schedule it, he sends me a calendar invite. Play the Aliens game at 8 p.m., the scheduling means it actually happens. So schedule a fun activity to do maybe by yourself, especially if you're a parent with young kids. That can be hard to do. 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a walk. Read a couple chapters of that book you've been meaning to read. Watch half of the film you've been wanting to watch. And thirdly, maybe a harder conversation you've been putting off. This is a bit of a strange question. I don't know why it's the one that came to mind here. I think some of us often have a source of tension in our life that feels like, I just don't have the space to deal with that. I don't have the mental energy to deal with that. Maybe this week would be a week to deal with that. That can be a conversation maybe with a friend that you've been experiencing some tension, something that needs working out. It could be something with a spouse where you feel like, we really need to talk about this, but we just haven't made the time. It could be a hard conversation with yourself, something you kind of have seen in yourself that you kind of need to face. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes of silence. Work through these questions, write them down on a piece of paper, and I'll let you know what happens next. Give you about 40 more seconds. Still some people writing. Okay, if you have your paper, can you just kind of lift it up? Okay, now I want you to take that paper. I want you to rip it in half. Not into like a bunch of little pieces, just in half. Like actually. Dan is like in pain right now. For some of you, you spent like 3 minutes doing this. It's not like you worked hard on this project and I'm making you mess it up. This is like 3 minutes in church. Rip it in half. Some of you are like, yes, but thank you. You literally, we spent 2-3 minutes writing some few things on a piece of scrap paper, and for some of you, there's a tension there. I don't want to. I made a plan. I wrote something down. Imagine how much harder it is to submit the bigger things to God in our lives. How much harder it is to give up some of our bigger plans, some of our bigger desires, our bigger habits. But it's something we can practice. That's a muscle we can strengthen. You start with the little things. You start with the little plans that you submit to God. So I want to encourage you in the following couple of weeks to experiment, to flex those muscles about being more flexible. Cultures tend to gravitate towards certain sides. The UK is generally a bit more rigid and a bit more planny. So most of you are going to be generally more on this spectrum. So you're going to be like, I'm a free soul. I live by the Spirit. Come to Turkey and we'll see. So experiment with being more flexible. Try and intentionally make some last-minute plans. Maybe find someone after the service today and try and find someone to have lunch with. If that makes you nervous, it's because you live over here. It's okay to be nervous about that. People might say no, which can feel a bit awkward. But they might say yes. It happened last week. We found someone. They said yes. Had a lovely lunch. Invite someone around for tea, even if that's not something you normally do because you're not like a person that loves to host, or your house is a bit messy, or it's a bit small. Stretch yourself a little bit with that. See what God does with that. And if you do find that you're on the other side of the spectrum and making plans, that's just not in your wheelhouse, then commit to something. Make some commitments. Stop putting off that thing you've been putting off. Just put it on the diary. Pay the booking fee, even if it isn't refundable. Be the first one to commit to something in the group chat to say, I will be there and I will bring hummus. I won't bring hummus, maybe I'll bring something else. But most importantly, I want to say take these things to the Lord in prayer. Take your heart to the Lord in prayer. For the small things, but also for the bigger ones. Maybe you've made some big decisions over the years, some big decisions a long time ago, and you've just kind of carried on with the consequences of those decisions, of those plans, without ever really kind of resubmitting them to God. Maybe they're good plans at the time. Are we making space for God to tweak those plans? To completely upend them? Maybe take some time to re-examine some of those big questions about where you live, the work you do, the friendships you pursue and develop, the way you structure your week, the habits of your household, what your involvement with church looks like, how you spend your money. Those are big questions. You're not going to do those in 3 minutes on a piece of scrap paper. but they're worth taking the time to bring to God, to submit to him. See if he might be leading you to make some scary changes, to trust him for something new and unexpected. Maybe the band can come back up and we can have some time to do that together. Maybe you can think of one small thing or one bigger thing that you want to begin to bring to the Lord, to begin to submit to him, to ask if he wants to do something different in your life. If he wants to change maybe how you're spending some of your time or how you're spending some of your money or who you're spending time with. And I want you to keep, if you can, keep both halves of that paper. You can hold that tension. Do those things that you wrote out in those 3 minutes. Just because it took 3 minutes to plan it doesn't mean it's not a good plan. It might be a good thing to do. But be open to not doing them if the Lord leads otherwise. It's not a very clear message, is it? My message is, hey guys, Scripture says this. Sometimes you do that, and sometimes, I feel like that's a lot of life, isn't it? It's holding that tension. So I don't want to be a right-wing extremist, and I don't want to be a left-wing communist, and I want to be in the middle somewhere, and everyone wants to pull me to one side, and it's hard, it's awkward, it's tense. Hold that tension. Let God work in that tension to strengthen your soul, to strengthen your character. Let's make some good plans, and let's be willing to change them if God wants us to.